If you've spent any time on YouTube looking up magnesium, you've probably seen a video just like this one. Some bold claim that a $2 food beats your magnesium pills by 16 times, or 20 times, or forever. The number seems to change depending on which channel you're watching. And the thumbnail is always the same too, isn't it? A dramatic close-up of a pill bottle with a big red X through it. Maybe a glowing vegetable, a shocked face. The algorithm has figured out exactly what makes people click, and the people making those videos have figured out the algorithm, which means a lot of what you find when you go looking for health information is optimized to get your attention, not necessarily to give you accurate information. So today we're going to do something a little different. Instead of just repeating that claim, we're going to fact-check it. We're going to look at what the actual research says about magnesium pills, why so many of them genuinely do underperform, and what cheap real food can do that a bottle of pills sometimes can't. And by the end, you'll know exactly which $2 food deserves a spot in your kitchen, and why, even though 16 times better isn't a real number from any study, the food behind the headline really is one of the best magnesium sources on the planet. Stick with me. This one might change how you think about your supplement drawer. Let's start with why this mineral gets so much attention in the first place, because it's not hype. The attention is genuinely deserved. Magnesium is involved in more than 300 different enzyme reactions in your body. 300. That's not a typo. It helps your muscles contract and relax properly, which is why a magnesium shortfall often shows up first as a cramp in your calf at 2 in the morning. It plays a role in keeping your heart rhythm steady. It helps regulate blood sugar and blood pressure. It's involved in how your nerves send signals, how your bones hold on to calcium, and something that gets a lot of attention lately, how well you sleep at night. The sleep connection deserves a little more time because it's one of the most common reasons people start looking into magnesium in the first place. Magnesium is involved in activating the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of your nervous system that helps you calm down and shift into rest mode. It also plays a role in regulating melatonin, the hormone that signals to your body that it's time to sleep. Low magnesium levels have been associated with poorer sleep quality, more nighttime waking, and difficulty falling asleep in several studies. That doesn't mean a magnesium supplement is a guaranteed sleep cure, but it does mean that if you're sleeping badly and eating a magnesium-poor diet, addressing that gap could help more than you'd expect. Now here's the part that surprises people. A large share of adults aren't getting enough of it. Estimates vary by country and methodology, but a meaningful percentage of the population consistently falls short of the recommended daily amount, which sits around 400 to 420 milligrams a day for men and 310 to 320 milligrams a day for women. Some surveys of Western populations suggest upward of half of adults don't hit that target on a given day. Why the shortfall? A few reasons keep showing up in the research. Modern agricultural soil has lower mineral content than it did decades ago. This isn't a fringe claim. It's been documented in soil composition studies going back to at least the 1990s. Intensive farming depletes minerals from the soil faster than they're naturally replenished, and magnesium is one of the minerals that's declined. So the same serving of broccoli or spinach you eat today may simply not deliver the same magnesium that the same serving would have 50 years ago. Refining grains strips out most of the magnesium that's naturally there. Whole wheat keeps the magnesium. White flour loses it, along with most of the fiber and a significant chunk of the other minerals and B vitamins. White bread, white pasta, white rice. These are staples for a huge portion of the population, and they've had the nutritional density processed right out of them. When enrichment adds some nutrients back, magnesium typically isn't one of them, and a lot of people simply aren't eating the foods that are richest in this mineral. Leafy greens, seeds, nuts, legumes. If your diet skews toward processed convenience foods, which is again a massive portion of what most people in wealthy countries actually eat, you can go days at a time without hitting meaningful magnesium numbers. So it's no surprise that magnesium supplements have become a billion-dollar category. Walk into any pharmacy, and you'll find a wall of options: magnesium oxide, citrate, glycinate, malate, threonate, and more. They all promise the same thing. Some of the marketing is quite sophisticated. Some of it is remarkably similar to the clickbait YouTube videos we started with. But here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, and where a lot of those viral videos actually have a kernel of truth buried in the exaggeration. Magnesium pills. Not all magnesium supplements are created equal, and the cheapest ones on the shelf are very often the worst absorbed. The most common and cheapest form in store brand and budget supplements is magnesium oxide. It looks great on paper. Gram for gram, it has one of the highest concentrations of elemental magnesium of any compound used in supplements, around 60% elemental magnesium by weight. Compare that to magnesium glycinate, which is often around 14%. So at first glance, oxide seems like a clear winner. More magnesium per pill, lower price. What's not to like? The problem is solubility. Magnesium oxide barely dissolves in water, and your gut absorbs minerals largely based on how well they dissolve in the aqueous environment of your digestive tract. A mineral that won't dissolve can't get through the intestinal wall. It just passes through. So the impressive number on the label, 500 milligrams of magnesium oxide, becomes a lot less impressive when most of it ends up leaving your body without ever being used. Here's where the research gets genuinely interesting, and a little messy, which is worth being upfront about because this is where a lot of online health content plays fast and loose. One frequently cited study from 2001 by researchers Firoz and Graeber measured how much magnesium oxide actually made it into the bloodstream by looking at urinary excretion as a marker, and found an absorption rate of only around 4%. 4%. That number gets repeated constantly online, sometimes without context, and it's part of where claims like 16 times worse originally got their inspiration. Although, as we'll cover in a bit, nobody seems to be able to point to where the 16 itself actually came from. Other studies tell a more complicated story, because science usually does. A study using animal models found roughly 15% absorption for oxide. Some research looking at magnesium-deficient subjects found that oxide, despite lower absorption percentages, still delivered a meaningful total amount simply because the tablets contain so much elemental magnesium to begin with. Lower percentage of a very large number can still be an okay absolute amount. And a broader scientific review looking across multiple supplement studies concluded that organic forms, citrate, glycinate, malate, tend to be more reliably absorbed than inorganic ones like oxide and carbonate, but emphasized that the exact multiplier depends heavily on the specific study design, the dose used, and the individual taking it. What we can say with confidence, because multiple independent studies agree on this part, magnesium citrate and magnesium glycinate are absorbed considerably better than magnesium oxide in most research. Studies generally put citrate and glycinate absorption in the range of 25 to 40%, compared to single digits to the high teens for oxide. That's a real, meaningful, consistent difference across multiple research groups. It's just not a clean 16 times, and it's not identical in every study. There's a second issue that doesn't get talked about enough, and it deserves its own moment. Magnesium oxide is also a well-known laxative. It's the active ingredient in some over-the-counter constipation remedies, the exact same compound, sold for a different purpose, right there in the same pharmacy. When you take a high dose of magnesium oxide, it pulls water into your intestines and speeds transit time, which means that not only is a large portion not being absorbed in the first place, but what is down there is being moved through faster than your gut would otherwise process it. So a chunk of what you swallow isn't just poorly absorbed, it's also causing digestive disruption that can range from mildly inconvenient to genuinely unpleasant depending on how sensitive your system is. That's not a knock on magnesium itself. Magnesium in good, absorbable forms at appropriate doses is well tolerated by most people. It's specifically a knock on the cheapest delivery form of it. So if you've ever taken a magnesium pill, felt nothing, and assumed magnesium just doesn't work for you, there's a real chance the problem wasn't the mineral, it was the form. And that's a fixable problem, which is the good news here. There's actually a third issue worth mentioning briefly: timing and competition for absorption. Magnesium competes with calcium for absorption in the gut, so if you're taking both in the same large dose, they may partially interfere with each other. Taking your magnesium with a large, dairy-heavy meal, for instance, could theoretically reduce how much you absorb. This is a smaller factor than the form issue, but it's the kind of nuance that gets left out of most online health videos because it doesn't fit neatly into a headline. Now let's talk about the food. Of all the magnesium-rich foods out there, spinach, almonds, black beans, dark chocolate, avocado, one stands out for combining a genuinely high magnesium content with a genuinely low price tag and remarkable versatility: pumpkin seeds. A single 1-ounce serving of raw pumpkin seeds, that's about a small handful, roughly 28 grams, contains somewhere around 150 milligrams of magnesium. That's close to 37% of the daily target for an average adult from a snack-sized portion. Ounce for ounce, pumpkin seeds are one of the most magnesium-dense whole foods you can buy, and a full bag typically costs a few dollars, which works out to well under $2 for several substantial servings. At most grocery stores, we're talking about a food that costs less per ounce than most popular snack options and delivers dramatically more nutritional value. But the reason pumpkin seeds deserve attention isn't just the raw number on a nutrition label. It's everything that comes along with it, what researchers sometimes call the food matrix. When you eat magnesium as part of a whole food, you're not getting an isolated mineral. You're getting a whole supporting cast. Pumpkin seeds are also a meaningful source of zinc, which supports immune function and wound healing, and is itself commonly deficient alongside magnesium in people who eat processed food-heavy diets. They contain phosphorus, manganese, and copper, all minerals that tend to travel together in nature and that work together in many of the same biological pathways. They're a solid source of plant protein, with around 9 grams per ounce, making them genuinely filling in a way a pill obviously isn't. They contain healthy, unsaturated fats, including some omega-6 fatty acids, and fiber, all of which slow digestion in ways that may improve how steadily minerals are absorbed over time, rather than arriving in your gut all at once, the way a concentrated pill dose does. There's also a compound in pumpkin seeds called tryptophan, a precursor to serotonin and, downstream from that, melatonin. So when pumpkin seeds are cited as a potential sleep aid, there are actually two parallel mechanisms at work: the magnesium supporting the parasympathetic nervous system, and the tryptophan potentially nudging sleep hormone production. The research on this is preliminary, and eating a small handful of pumpkin seeds isn't going to function like a pharmaceutical sleep aid. But for people who are already mildly deficient in magnesium and eating low tryptophan diets, the combination is worth knowing about. Pumpkin seeds also don't carry the laxative downside that high-dose magnesium oxide tablets do. You can eat a handful with your afternoon coffee and never think about it again. No chalky aftertaste, no mid-afternoon trip to the bathroom, no giant pill to get down. That matters more than it sounds when you're talking about something you're going to try to do every day for months. And there's a behavioral dimension that the lab studies can't capture, but that matters enormously in real life. People are far more likely to consistently eat a food they enjoy than to remember a supplement every single day for months on end. Supplement adherence studies are actually pretty humbling. A lot of people start taking something, get out of the habit, restart, forget again, and end up with an average intake that's a fraction of what they intended. A bag of pumpkin seeds sitting on your counter next to the coffee maker, or in your desk drawer at work, or in a small jar in your bag. That's a much lower friction habit than a pill bottle on a high shelf that you only remember when you run out. Consistency is everything with a mineral like magnesium, because your body doesn't store huge reserves of it the way it can store fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. Small, steady intake over time tends to matter more than any single large dose, which is another point in food's favor over sporadic supplementation. So, is it fair to say pumpkin seeds beat magnesium pills? It depends entirely on which pill you're comparing them to. Against a high-quality magnesium glycinate or citrate supplement taken consistently, pumpkin seeds aren't necessarily superior in raw absorption terms. Those forms are specifically engineered to dissolve well and are genuinely effective. But against the cheap magnesium oxide tablets that make up a huge share of what's actually sold in stores, because they're the cheapest to produce and therefore the most commonly stocked, a $2 bag of pumpkin seeds is a genuinely strong, often better, choice. And it comes packaged with nutrients your body needs anyway. And it's one you don't need a prescription, a subscription, a delivery fee, or a multi-level marketing sales pitch to obtain. So where does that leave the viral claim we started with? Here's the honest answer. There is no single peer-reviewed study that concludes pumpkin seeds, or any whole food, beat magnesium pills by exactly 16 times. That number appears to be a marketing flourish. Something that sounds specific and dramatic enough to be credible gets used because it grabs attention and then gets copied from one video to the next without anyone going back to check where it actually came from. It's the game of telephone that a lot of health content on the internet plays, where a real but nuanced finding gets simplified, then exaggerated, then repeated until the exaggeration is all that's left. What is true, and what's worth remembering long after this video ends, is this. The absorption rate of cheap magnesium oxide really has been measured as low as 4% in more than one human study, while whole food magnesium sources combined with their natural cofactors tend to be absorbed more steadily and without digestive downside. Depending on which low-end oxide study and which food absorption estimate you pick, you actually could construct a multiplier somewhere in a similar ballpark to 16 but it would be cherry-picking one number from one study under specific conditions, not reporting a settled scientific consensus, and a responsible video should tell you that rather than just hand you the number and move on as if it were gospel. The bigger truth, the one that actually matters for your health, is simpler than any multiplier and more durable. If you've been taking the cheapest magnesium pill on the shelf and wondering why you don't feel a difference, the form of magnesium you're taking matters enormously, and a handful of pumpkin seeds is a cheap, tasty, well-rounded way to raise your intake without any of the guesswork. No online calculator required, no subscription needed, just a food your great-grandparents would have recognized. So let's make this practical, because information without application tends to just fade away. A reasonable daily target is 1 to 2 ounces of pumpkin seeds. Roughly a small handful to a generous handful, which gets you somewhere between 150 and 300 milligrams of magnesium. Pair that with other magnesium-rich foods through the day. A handful of almonds, some dark leafy greens at dinner, a square of dark chocolate, and you can realistically hit or come close to your daily target from food alone without much deliberate effort. Here are a few practical ways to work them in without having to think too hard about it. Toast them lightly in a dry pan for a few minutes until they start to puff slightly and turn golden. This brings out a nutty, almost buttery flavor that plain raw seeds completely lack. A pinch of salt and maybe a little smoked paprika or cumin afterward, and you have a snack that travels well in a small container and holds up for several days in a sealed jar at room temperature. Sprinkle them over salads instead of croutons. Sprinkle them over soup for a little texture contrast. Stir them into oatmeal or yogurt in the morning. They work anywhere you'd use a nut or a seed for crunch, which turns out to be a lot of places once you start paying attention. Blend a tablespoon into a smoothie. You won't taste much of anything, depending on what else is in the blender, but you'll get the nutrition without having to think about it. Mix them into a homemade trail mix with a handful of almonds, a few walnuts, and a little dark chocolate, both of which are also solid magnesium sources in their own right, so the combination compounds the benefit in a genuinely pleasant way. This is a snack that costs less per serving than most things you'd grab from a vending machine and delivers far more nutritional value. One practical note on buying them: choose raw or dry roasted, and check the label if you're watching sodium. Some store-bought roasted varieties are heavily salted, and depending on how many you eat, that can add up. A plain bag that you toast yourself at home with whatever seasoning you want gives you full control over both flavor and sodium. And one thing worth saying clearly, because it belongs in any responsible health video: pumpkin seeds are a food, not a medication. If you're dealing with a diagnosed magnesium deficiency, a medical condition that affects nutrient absorption, kidney disease, or you're taking medications that interact with magnesium levels, such as certain diuretics, antibiotics, or proton pump inhibitors, food choices alone may not be sufficient, and decisions about your intake and any supplementation should go through your doctor or a registered dietitian, not a YouTube video, including this one. To be fair to the other side of this conversation, because this channel isn't in the business of pretending one food solves everything, food alone genuinely doesn't cover every situation. Some people have a much harder time maintaining adequate magnesium through diet alone. Older adults tend to absorb magnesium less efficiently, as intestinal absorption declines with age. People with digestive conditions like Crohn's disease or celiac disease may have compromised absorption regardless of what they eat. Certain medications, diuretics, proton pump inhibitors, some antibiotics, can deplete magnesium levels in ways that diet alone struggles to compensate for. People managing type 2 diabetes often have lower magnesium levels, partly because elevated blood sugar increases how much magnesium is lost through urine. If that's you, the lesson from everything we've covered today isn't throw out your pills. It's two things. First, if you're going to take a magnesium supplement, choose a form your body can actually use. Glycinate and citrate are the most consistently well-absorbed options in the research, and the modest extra cost over oxide is generally worth it. Second, don't treat the supplement as your only strategy. Pair it with magnesium-rich foods. A pill and a handful of pumpkin seeds together will likely do more for you than either one alone, because you're getting both a reliable supplemental dose and the full food supporting cast of cofactors and slower release delivery. Food and supplements work best as teammates, not rivals. They're solving slightly different parts of the same problem. The food gives you steady, well-rounded intake with zero downside and a lot of bonus nutrition. A well-chosen supplement can fill a genuine gap when food alone doesn't get you there. The goal was never to pick a winner. It was to make sure whichever one you're relying on is actually being absorbed and actually making a difference. So here's where that leaves us. 16 times better was never a real number from a real study, and now you know that, which puts you ahead of most people who only ever see the headline. But the food behind that headline earned its reputation honestly. A $2 bag of pumpkin seeds gives you real, well-absorbed magnesium, a supporting cast of minerals and protein your body needs, and none of the chalky aftertaste, digestive trouble, or near-zero absorption that the cheapest magnesium pills can bring. Here's the challenge I want to leave you with. Try it for 2 weeks. A handful a day, toasted, salted, however you like them. Keep them somewhere you'll actually see them, rather than in a cabinet you open once a month. Pay attention to your sleep, your muscles, your evening restlessness, your energy in the afternoons. Then decide for yourself whether the hype, minus the fake math, was actually onto something real. Most of us know what we should eat in a general sense. The gap is usually between knowing and doing. Pumpkin seeds are cheap enough that there's almost no financial risk in trying. They're portable, shelf-stable, versatile, and genuinely good when they're prepared well. There are very few nutrition upgrades that cost less or require less thought to implement. If this kind of fact check was useful to you, I'd love to know in the comments what other viral health claim you'd like to see put under the microscope. There's no shortage of material, as I'm sure you've noticed. And as always, talk to your doctor before making any major changes to your supplement routine, especially if you have existing health conditions. See you in the next one.